Hey, welcome to Training with Kayce. I'm your host, Kayce Cover, and we are working on a series called Puppy Prep. And last podcast, we talked about using timelines to make training plans. So, if you recall, the original idea is that with SATs, we don't want to wait till we have a problem to teach the solution. What we want to do is we want to come up with a training curriculum to develop the best dog, the best really any animal, and the best partnership. So while we're training, we're also going to be developing our relationship with our animal partner. So to do that, I recommended using a timeline. And there's two kinds of timelines that I use. The first one is a lifeline. And on the lifeline, I write out the animal's entire lifespan. In fact, I always add extra time. I want to envision these animals living longer than expected. And by the way, that has been a self-fulfilling prophecy with the animals that I've been privileged to oversee. So we take this long lifeline and then we note the life events that the animal needs to prepare for. So we have two kinds of events. We have the things that happen once in the animal's lifespan. For example, the puppy gets weaned. The puppy leaves his mother and family. The puppy goes to the vet. The puppy, gets his vaccines, right? And then the second trip to the vet and all the things he's going to get exposed to and the timeline that's involved in that. And then we look at when is this dog going to go to a groomer? When is he's already been to the vet, right? When is he going to go to a training class? When is he going to go on a trip? When might he have to learn how to deal with kennels? So we put all those dates on the timeline. And I recommend you use a second timeline, and that's what I call the annual line. And those are events that are important every year, but they do recur. So it's not so much that you have to train for each of these events, but rather you prepare the animal and you move the training around these events. So I know it most from an exotic animal perspective. My sea lions would start breeding in the late spring. So the males would quit eating and the females really backed off on their food as well. They were more agitated. They were preoccupied with everything that had to do with breeding. So what was that? Well, first of all, their bodies were changing, so less appetite. Then the females gave birth and they had to nurse those pups. And especially the first time, that's a lot of unknowns. And then um, they would breed again. And they would have a change of fur. They would shed or molt their fur. And you weren't going to get much cooperation in training at this time of their lives, especially when they were kept males and females together. So we were out of commission as far as serious training from sometime in May to probably around at least a week or so into July. And it could change, depending on where in the world you were, that those dates might move a little bit. And some animals were more receptive, but overall, you needed to plan around that. But it's more than that. Because in the summer, in addition to these huge events in the animals' lives, and there's a lot of angst around that because males are competing for females, and not all females are treated equally, and it goes on and on. But in addition, you had other conditions like the heat from the summer, that can be a big stress. The number of people that were appearing. In your house, you might not have thousands of people suddenly drop by like we did at the National Zoo, but you might have other visitors. You might be going on vacation. You might have holidays like 4th of July that might have stressful aspects to them, like fireworks. So use your annual line to help you arrange your training schedule around these stresses and also to remind yourself to prepare for them in time. For example, we trained the sea lion females around a breast pump with the idea that if we needed to pump milk for a baby, we hopefully would be able to. Well, you got to get that done before the animal quits working. So if you need to pump breast milk maybe in, mid-June, you need to have it finished by the beginning of May, the training finished by the beginning of May, just to be sure. And if there was going to be, fireworks, you want to try to have that ahead of time also. Now, you can always work through these things, but we strive to train ahead of need. If you want to be the least invasive, the least aversive, the least stressing of trainers, you get there by training in plenty of time so you don't have to push an animal through a difficult situation. So I say push the animal through, but maybe it's better said we pull them through, we help them get through, we lend them a helping hand, but it's always better if they can just do it on their own. Okay, so that is the review of the importance of the timeline in making a training plan. So for the class, I'm making a detailed slideshow that shows step by step how to do this. But my class that reviewed it let me know it's a little intense for people that are just starting this. So let's just talk about it conversationally. So, what do you do with the timeline besides note all the dates? Well, I just said you want to train ahead of need. So, you set the dates that you need to have each training task done by. Going to the kennel has to be or should be done a little ahead of the need for being in the kennel. In other words, before you plan to go on vacation. Vet visits need to be done before you need to go to the vet, the training for them. Grooming, obedience, vocabulary, all these things. So you look at your dates and then you make a list of what behaviors you need by which date. That's pretty simple, right? It takes a lot of thought because as you start working with these ideas, you're going to realize that, oh my gosh, there's way more than you initially think. So let's just talk about going to the vets. What has to happen? Well, the dog would be helpful if he knows his body parts so that he recognizes where the vet's going to go. And wouldn't it be great if he knew what the different parts of the exam were, that the dog understood about the light going in the eyes before the vet blinds him for the first time with the otoscope? I said the otoscope, but you know what I mean, the eyeball thing. All right, so then otoscope comes in also. Especially if a dog has any sensitivity, he's not necessarily ready for you to stick something in his ear. Teach him to be comfortable with that ahead of time. Is that all there is? Well, stethoscope, that can feel kind of invasive. Palpation, getting an injection, blood collection, examining the teeth, rubbing on the teeth, rubbing on the gums. There's more. Oh, the smell of alcohol. That's a great favorite, right? Dogs are very sensitive about smells. They may not like that. So, various smells that I expect to have at the vets, the equipment, like the thing that shines in their eyes, the thing that goes in their ears, the stethoscope itself, um, being held, being picked up. Usually, to teach an animal to allow me to pick them up is a matter of 1 or 2 minutes. But if you don't teach them ahead of time and you just pick them up, you can make a lasting impression, shall we say. Not a good impression. So you want the animal not to feel ambushed when it's time to put him on the table. And if it's prudent. In fact, I would say everybody needs to do this because you just don't know what life will bring you. Teach your dog to wear a muzzle. When he goes to the vets, that can simplify things. And it's a really important skill for a dog to have. Okay, so going to the vets is more than palpation and stethoscope and even blood collection and injection. It is the muzzle. It's being lifted up. It's being seen on the floor with the vet crouching next to you. It's being held by people that you don't know. It's being held for a duration. It's being, we haven't even talked about sticking a thermometer up the rear end. I mean, the dogs very plainly look at you. It's like, you have a license to do this. As well, they might ask, how about anal gland extractions? Be a nice thing to introduce to them before it just gets done. So now you've got a list of behaviors, and that is just for the vets. But what about other behaviors? If you're going to do these things, are you going to teach your dog about being handled before you go to the vets, like just for your purposes? I was amazed to learn from colleagues, for example, at Wood Green Animal Shelters, that explained to me that many dogs will not tolerate being touched, especially behind the rib cage, and that is something new, that it used to be that dogs expected to be touched. You want your dog going someplace where they're going to be scanned for, chips. They're going to have veterinary behaviors done and so on and so forth. And they don't even feel comfortable with somebody looking intently at them or touching them behind the rib cage or constraining them. These are all things you could teach. And they're not necessarily part of the vet exam, but they might be. But here's the point. You're going to want to teach those on the way to the vet exam. While you're doing the body, the body parts and the types of touching, like we literally teach the animals what the various touches are. This is touching, this is pressing, this is poking, this is pricking, this is release, this is constriction. We teach all that so that we can explain to the dog at the vets what to expect. So we're going to do that well before it's time to go to the vet. So these are behaviors that we harvest on the way to these other important behaviors. But because we teach them and name them individually, we've got them for use for the rest of the animal's life. Okay. And we'll talk about that more in future podcasts. So we're going to end up with a list of behaviors that are directly involved in the goal, like going to the vets, but also a list of the behaviors that we are going to create on the way to creating the vet visit behaviors. We're going to list them all and we're going to give them names. And we're going to teach the dogs not only, what to do, but the names of all those things. It's a lot easier than you imagine, I guarantee you. Even my sister says she has a hard time talking to a dog and giving the dog the names of things. And then she turned around and admitted, but she talks to babies nonstop to give them all the information she can about what to expect from the world and how to cope with it. Well, newsflash, your dogs need the same support. Think of yourself. If you suddenly got dropped into a new alien culture, it could be just as alien as going to a city where they have a different accent or a different culture or whatever. You don't even have to go to another country. It's disorienting. It gives you uncertainty. So get ready for these things ahead of time. Help your dog get ready by explaining it, describing it, showing your dog what he's going to encounter. Give him a name for it. Talk about it. Remind him of what he's going to encounter. So you went from your timeline, which gave you the dates, to your list of behaviors that are directly required for your goal, and also those behaviors which support the other behaviors. So you're going to create little behavioral components, give them names. You could even think of it as Lego training, where you're going to put these little modules together to build a more complex behavior. Well, now what are you going to do? Well, the third step is you order those behaviors by priority. So even though it's really important to get the preparation for the vet visit done, my experience, my priority is to create vocabulary, because research has shown that one of the most effective things you can do to relieve stress is to name the stress for the person experiencing it. Really, really. But think about, I've actually had situations. Sometime when we meet in person, ask me about the missile exploding over my high school football field. Okay. I saw something and it created a lot of uncertainty for me. And it did for my classmates, my colleagues in the marching band. We were about to go on and perform for the halftime celebration. And I see this thing and I'm trying to get my friends sitting around me to look at it and to talk about what is going on. And the people could not deal. I talked to them later about it. They couldn't deal with this thing that they didn't really understand, that was way up in the sky and really scary. And I could deal with it. And I think the reason I could is because my father worked with nuclear missiles. He helped design them and test them and so forth. And I had grown up watching missiles get launched into space. And So I understood what it looked like, and I understood, why the fires lit and the flames came out the back of the missile and all that kind of stuff. But all my friends sitting with me in the bleachers may not have ever even seen a missile. I mean, I grew up where they were launched. I saw lots of them. But my friends, I don't know if they would have ever seen a missile. So then when they see a missile where something really strange is happening, no wonder had uncertainty. But it was such uncertainty that it reminds me of the stories of Captain Cook and Columbus talking with the indigenous people. So they arrive with their ships or boats, I would call Columbus's. But anyway, they arrived there, and the native people could not see the boats in the harbor. And it took about 3 days before the indigenous people could acknowledge what they saw. That's exactly what I saw from my friends. I'm pointing at the thing, I'm poking them. I like, look at that. And what was that? It was a massive explosion in the sky. It looked like fireworks that would not fall to the ground. I expected them to announce it over the intercom for everybody in the audience to look up. It wasn't announced. Nobody said anything about it. You talk about the elephant in the room. This was the missile fireworks in the sky. Now, I told you that my father worked with that kind of thing. So when nobody that I was sitting with saw them, acknowledged them, could deal with them, I went to my father and I asked him, could he explain it? And he said, let me check at work and I'll get back to you. So the next night, he explained that a missile had had a problem that made it unstable, and they had to detonate it in the upper atmosphere so it was up high enough that when the pieces fell, they would burn completely before they fell on the ground. And I happened to be looking up when that detonation was done. So all these different things, and there's lots of details, and I'll tell that in another story another time. But every single one was explained. Every single one was explained. This amazing, once in a lifetime experience that seemed like, that, yeah, it'd be like if you were there and the spaceship landed. And then you've got to explain it to your people at home, and they're going to be, yeah, it was kind of like that. But in reality, it was a simple, logical thing if you had that knowledge. Okay, so the animal needs to be prepared for these things, and language is a huge part of it. This is how you connect the animal to the previous learning, to the previous understandings. This is a missile, remember, like you used to watch when you were 5 years old and standing on the beach in Cape Canaveral? Oh, yeah, I remember that. I remember all the cars on the beach and the sun beating down on us and putting our hands over our heads like that so we could peer up through our arms and our fingers and watch these missiles hurtling across the sky. Hey, I'll tell you a little side thing. I watched Ham go up in space, and later on, at the National Zoo, I met him in person. Is that cool or what? Okay, so naming things is very important. So that's going to be my top priority. Handling is going to probably be next because I'm not going to get anything done at the vet's if I can't handle my dog. Or let's just say it'll be much harder than it needs to be, not just on the vet staff, but also on my dog. And of course, if my dog's having problems, I'm going to be stressed. I don't need any more stress. So we're going to list our behaviors by priority. What would be a low priority behavior? You know what? You're not going to believe this, but actually teaching the dog to allow you to stick the needle in his skin. With a little bit of prep, I would say an average of 1 or 2 minutes, a dog is ready for an injection. And the needle going in is about the least of it. It's probably much, much more important to teach them about constriction and about duration so you can tell them how long they're going to be held or until what event they're going to be held, that kind of thing. But once you have your priorities, then you get to work because you need to train ahead of need. It doesn't help if you have a great training plan to prepare an animal for the vets, but you don't get the training done before you go to the vets. So what's going to be next? I think that we can talk about, now I'm on my, I forgot to think about this before I did this podcast. All right, so we're going to do the priorities and the behaviors. We could do one of the actual behaviors. We could talk about how to prep an animal for an injection. Okay, this is so simple. I've got videos up of it, but you don't even need to see a video. You just need to go through the process. And by the way, when I've done it in the past, even animals that had a history of problems with injections, I never saw a problem at all. I would have thought they never had an issue with them. That's how powerful it is to present something in the correct way. Okay, that's it for this subject tonight, but please stay tuned because we're going to keep developing this idea and getting you ready for looking at training in this way. I think you're going to love it. And if you love this, make sure that you go back and see the pup prep on planning for your dog. And then hopefully we'll have the injection one up already. In the meantime, you know that if you like and comment and subscribe, it helps me climb up the algorithm so that more people will benefit from this information. Hey, thank you so much for spending time with me. I'll see you next time.